Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, one of the most remarkable men, let alone president, in our history. A lot can be said. Many people see him as their favorite president because he's so fascinating and so, in many ways, contradictory. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but certainly more contradictions in this man than just about any other president, probably any other president. Man of amazing talents.
Father of American archaeology.
Yeah, among many other things. Yeah, archaeology, and I'll get into the list in just a second here. So the bibliography. Forrest McDonald is one of my go-to biographers for the presidency. I mentioned him as he had a biography of Washington as well. He just does the presidency. He does not cover the whole life. Very critical of Thomas Jefferson. I watched an interview with Forrest McDonald once where he talks about this. The book that he wrote is in a series where the publisher wanted to do every president, and they were asking around for someone to do Jefferson. And Forrest McDonald was saying, you know, a lot of historians don't want to focus on his presidency. They want to focus on other things. And so he volunteered to do it. He would take on this task. Not all these wonderful things that he did prior to being president, just his presidency. And so he comes out really very critical. To my mind, probably a little too critical, but he brings out a lot of things that other biographers do not. Fawn Brodie, and here I think I need to make a public apology to Fawn Brodie, because years ago, back in the 80s, when I was first delving into my historical studies, I read an article once by some historian who did a review of this book by Fawn Brodie, and he was outraged. How could she say such things about Thomas Jefferson, that he would actually sleep with a slave girl and have children by her? And that was the consensus at the time, that the great historians of the day would be outraged that such a thing would be promulgated down to this day. Certainly they should know better than to think that Thomas Jefferson would do such a thing. And so that was my first introduction, by the way, to that whole controversy about Sally Hemings. And so I would tell people, whenever the name Fawn Brodie came up, I said, you got to be careful about her, because you know she's pushing this idea that Thomas Jefferson slept with his slave girl and had children by her. And then I looked into it myself sometime later, and I realized, well, there really is good evidence that he slept with her, and those were his children by her. And so I backtracked, as many people did, and then of course the DNA evidence came out virtually proving that it was definitely Thomas Jefferson's kids that she was having. So I just needed to do that, make this public announcement of apology to Fawn Brodie. But aside from that, it's a nice biography. One thing that I would caution about this book, as I would with virtually any book that talks about, this is the intimate history of such and such a person, the inner life, what this person was feeling and thinking. Almost inevitably, someone who writes a book like that goes farther than what the evidence justifies. You do not know what somebody is thinking because of necessarily because of the letters that they write or the actions that they take in given situations. You can have a good idea in many instances, but like I said, when somebody does that, they almost invariably decide to take it further than the evidence warrants. So that's just my say on that. But other than that, like I said, a very nice read. Has anybody read that, by the way? Good. Yeah, very nice read. Not a lot of political side of it, more personal. Okay, Paige Smith, a revealing biography. I saw this, I mentioned Paige Smith, who did the 2-volume on John Adams, as, you know, he's one of my favorite historians. I really enjoy what he's done. On Jefferson, when he says a revealing biography, I would say that, well, it's revealing if you haven't read a lot on Thomas Jefferson. It's 315 pages, and almost maybe a third of it, maybe a quarter of it, is pictures. So it's not in depth in any sense of the word, but it does bring out some very interesting things about Thomas Jefferson. I mean, how could you not? There's so many interesting things about him. So, but anyway, a nice quick read, lots of pictures. Going on, John Meacham, Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power. This is a more in-depth biography, won the Pulitzer Prize, so well worth reading. And as the title suggests, he focuses on Thomas Jefferson's use of power in his life, in his various positions that he's had. So, well worth reading, very engaging. One thing that I was a bit disappointed with this biography, and I'm really surprised actually, the one incident in which Thomas Jefferson, seen by many to be abusing his power, in the Embargo Act that I'll get into in a little while, he talks very little about the Embargo Act and the actions that Jefferson took in that particular incident. Henry Adams, another one of the Adams descendants. History of the United States of America during the administrations of Thomas Jefferson. 2 volumes. And as one might imagine, Henry Adams, by the way, is anybody familiar with Henry Adams? The education of Henry Adams is a classic. If you haven't read that, I mean, it's seen time and time again. You go to any used bookstore, you always see that there because it is one of the great literary classics in our nation's history. But again, a very scholarly work and somewhat dry, very, very thorough though. Historians today look to that as a milestone in historical research because this guy was thorough. And then finally, Dumas Malone, Thomas Jefferson, 6 volumes. Much more readable, Dumas Malone. Very in-depth, of course, 6 volumes. If it's something that, I don't know why my throat is like this right now, but let me see if this helps. If you were ever into reading a multi-volume biography of any particular very fascinating character, this would be it, because he's very readable, very in-depth, and it's the type of 6 volumes that is not impossible to get through. Okay, Thomas Jefferson, born April 13th, 1743 on a plantation in Virginia. His education was mostly through tutors in his younger years. Learned Latin, Greek, and French, of course, as any well-educated person would be. Attended the College of William and Mary, studied law, admitted to the bar, 1767. He was raised on a plantation with slaves, and he, from a very early age, disliked slavery and yet used it thoroughly at the same time. I think with Jefferson, again, one of the many contradictions with Thomas Jefferson was that there is the abstract and then there's the concrete. In the abstract, slavery was a gross evil that should be done away with. In the concrete, I have slaves and I will use them. I will buy slaves and I will sell slaves. If someone else requests something, and he's done this, a visiting friend, someone from a foreign country, I need a good servant girl as slave to serve me in my household. Thomas Jefferson, why, sure. I'll make sure to find somebody who will be a good servant for you. And didn't think twice about it. So the abstract and the concrete with Thomas Jefferson was very separate. Of course, he became famous as the author of the Declaration of Independence. In his education, voraciously read, sometimes upwards of 12 to 15 hours per day studying. An incredible reader, and widely read too. But he was learning the works of John Locke, Francis Bacon, John Newton, a lot of the political writers that were influencing many of the Revolutionary period intellectuals in the United States. So the overriding theme was the rights of Englishmen. We often think of human rights today as being universal, and that's the way we should all think, right? But nobody thought that way at the time. Nobody in the world, I would say. When you thought about political rights, individual rights for people, you thought primarily of your own people, and they thought of the rights of Englishmen. And so in our country, we wanted our rights. And of course, it was just for men as well, not men and women. Women would not have the same rights. And we think, of course, today, that would be very narrow-minded and bigoted. In that day, it was very broad-minded because it was beyond what was typically thought of as rights at all. So this was a step forward. When we look back, it looks very bleak and narrow, but it was broadening the horizons at the time. Jefferson, he was not just interesting. He was not just remarkable. He's astonishing. The breadth of his knowledge. An inventor, an architect, botanist, naturalist, zoologist, paleontologist, linguist, diplomat, political scientist, lawyer, governor, lawmaker, vice president, president, and he played the violin very nicely too. So, yeah, an archaeologist, I guess I didn't throw that in. But yeah, and he wasn't just someone who dabbled in these things and knew a little bit about a lot of things. He knew a lot about a lot of things. Just incredible the knowledge he had in any one of these topics. He could speak at length as an authority. And here's just a few of his inventions. Here's a dumbwaiter. This is a copy machine, right? So you write with one and it copies on another piece of paper. This was a cipher. So you could put in code messages so that it wasn't revealed until it reaches the opposite person. This is a clock that he came up with and built. It had two sides, one for the inside and one for the outside. And this was partially for his slaves, and it would chime the hour and times of the day to do various things. And a plow. He came up with a more efficient plow that could cut deeper and more easily through the soil. But we're moving on. The election of 1796, he lost to John Adams. By the way, at this time, campaigning consisted of your supporters who would put articles in the paper, publish things in your defense, or fighting against the opposite side. As a person who's running for president, you do nothing. You stay at home. You do not give speeches. You do not travel the countryside. You may write letters to your friends asking for their support or not. But John Adams and Thomas Jefferson would have been seen to be very unseemly and overly ambitious if you were to go out and campaign for yourself. That would be very egotistical, very selfish, and you would not win if you did. And the campaign would only last a couple of months. Wouldn't that be nice? Now it's almost continuous. So he was vice president, but he was with the opposing party. So he often worked against John Adams in the letters that he would write to his friends, James Madison in particular. And so it was a very odd sort of thing. On the other hand, John Adams sought his advice on occasion, probably more than Washington ever sought his. And so there's the two of them. And then we come to the election of 1800. The Federalists were soundly defeated. They were discredited mostly because they had overreached in the Alien and Sedition Acts, became very unpopular, and came off as being really mean-spirited. And so now the Republicans were in the ascendancy, and Thomas Jefferson at their head. And Jefferson sees this as a second American Revolution. And in some ways it was. In some ways, I think mainly because, as I mentioned before, you now have the change from one party to another that was bloodless. Nobody killed anybody. Nobody went to jail because they were of the opposing party. And Jefferson reveled in this. His inaugural address was a milestone and is very well, it's very readable. You can look it up. Several very good quotes from his inaugural, wanting to reach out to the opposition, trying to be conciliatory. We are all Federalists. We're all Republicans. Every difference of opinion is not a difference in principle. Yes?
Do you think part of the reason Adams didn't go to the inauguration is because he might have been a little bit afraid that might not have pulled out?
Oh, no. There was no fear. There was a couple of things with John Adams. He was humiliated, definitely, and he took it hard for a while. There was actually another reason, though. His son Charles had just died, like a couple months before. I think in November, his son Charles, who was a severe alcoholic, who struggled for a number of years with alcoholism and just a dissolute lifestyle, that John Adams at one point he said, I'm done with you. I disavow you. And but then it got so bad that he died, and so he was still very distraught from that. So that was another thing. He probably felt that he just wouldn't belong there. This was now Jefferson's time, but he was not in the mood, that's for sure. One thing that I would mention, though, about this statement, we are all Federalists, we're all Republicans, it's a great line, and his whole inaugural is along those lines, that we are united as a country, and we have so much together in common. Wonderful speech. He was not an orator. He barely spoke loud enough to be heard by the front row. But it was published, and that's really how it was disseminated. But the line, we're all Federalists, we're all Republicans, it's a great line. He did not mean it, though. He wants everybody to be Republican. And he's, as president, that's what he was looking towards. I'm going to reconcile them, and we will all just be Republicans, not Federalists. So his closest advisors, James Madison as Secretary of State, and Albert Gallatin as Secretary of Treasury. Again, two of the greatest minds to have supporting you in your administration. James Madison, as had already been demonstrated, he is considered the father of the Constitution. He gave more input into our Constitution than any other single man. Albert Gallatin was a man not widely known today, but some people consider him every bit as sharp and intelligent in finances as Alexander Hamilton. I have a hard time believing that, but I'm no expert, so I can't say. But he was certainly a great genius of finance in his own right. One of the things that Jefferson had that John Adams did not, he had a charm. And I like this term, the charm offensive. He had his dinner parties. Now, he was a widower. His wife had died back in the 1780s. And so he had two daughters at this time who took over for the social life, the feminine side of the dinner parties. Thomas Jefferson, one of his contradictions that I find really fascinating, that's somewhat hard to believe even. He was charming, he was witty, he was highly intelligent, he could speak intelligently about just about anything, but he had no sense of humor whatsoever. And in my mind, it's hard to reconcile that, especially with someone who had the wit that he had. But at his dinner parties, which he would choose carefully who was showing up, you might have some Federalists at this dinner party. You would not have Federalists and Republicans at the same time. They would not mix well, and he knew that. So he would have a set of Republicans show up for his dinner parties, and on other occasions he'd have Federalists show up for his dinner parties. And he knew how to charm them. And one of the rules was, at these dinner parties, no politics. We can talk about anything, but we're not talking politics. And time again, the attendees at these dinner parties were so charmed. They would say, it's hard to vote against this guy when he wants something done legislatively. And it was said, one historian in particular that I really like said, Thomas Jefferson was not a soldier going into battle when he was in the presidency. He did not fight. He was a chess player. He knew how to play for the long haul, and he could schmooze with the best of them. And so the charm offensive, he got to know everybody personally. And so, especially with the Republicans, if Thomas Jefferson made a suggestion legislatively, something that Washington would never do, it was always a very polite suggestion that this is the direction that we should go. And they felt it. And so he was very successful in his presidency, largely because of that. So I really wanted a nice painting for that, the dinner parties, but I could not find one. So this is a play acting sort of thing. It's one of his dinner parties. One of the first things he wanted to do was to get rid of the Hamiltonian system that was in place from Washington's administration. So what was it that Hamilton pushed? He wanted taxes to support an army and the government, and he wanted a public debt. He wanted the debt. That was anathema to the Republicans. And so now Jefferson is going to abolish the internal taxes, the whiskey tax, the carriage tax, property tax, and he's going to slash the military budget, because that's one of the things that's really weighing on the national debt. And so he was going to eliminate, he did his best to reduce the federal deficit. And as I said, he said we're all Federalists, we're all Republicans, but he was appointing only Republicans to government positions. And they passed a new Judiciary Act that did away with several of those judgeships that were put in place by the Federalists earlier. So now we come to the great moment in Thomas Jefferson's first administration, first term of office, and it was brought about by this man in a roundabout fashion. Toussaint Louverture. Does that name sound familiar to anybody? Very good. It said the only truly successful slave revolt in history was in Haiti, led by this man. And the reason that this is important even beyond Haiti is because the ruler of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, was defeated in his object of creating an empire in the Western Hemisphere. So, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. So, the United States needed New Orleans. We needed the Mississippi River to transport goods, to trade with countries overseas. Spain and France had been kind of trading back and forth this territory. We didn't mind when Spain had it so much, as long as they didn't restrict us. They did a couple of times, but Spain was a country that could be managed. In 1801, France got it back from Spain, and Jefferson, for all of his French leanings, now let it be known that anybody who takes over that territory is going to be in opposition to us. And he sent envoys over to France, letting them know that we may now side with Great Britain because you have that territory. We need that. And so James Monroe, one of the envoys going to France, let it be known that we would like to purchase not the whole Louisiana territory, but New Orleans. And so because of the Toussaint Louverture defeated the Napoleonic armies in Haiti, Napoleon is now giving up the idea of having an empire in the Western Hemisphere and says, okay, we'll sell it to you. Only I'm going to get rid of the whole thing. I'm going to sell all of Louisiana for $15 million. That was the offer. And James Monroe, who was not authorized to accept such an offer, accepted it anyway, because he knew a good deal when he saw it. And so he messaged Thomas Jefferson, said, we can get the whole territory for $15 million. And Jefferson, with his strict constructionist belief in the Constitution, thought to himself, the Constitution does not allow anywhere for the gaining of new territory. So that goes against my beliefs. We're going to do it anyway, because this is too good to pass up. He did have the idea of suggesting to the legislature, let's create an amendment to the Constitution so that we can do this legally. Then he decided, nah, never mind. Let's just do it, because we need to do it now. There's no time to waste. And of course, that leads to Lewis and Clark expedition to explore this territory. And Jefferson was just practically drooling at the opportunity that he had to see for himself the things that could be brought back from this territory. Yes?
Speaking of your earlier point about his thoughts about constitutionality, and simply wasn't, still must have had to deal with Congress for that $15 million.
Right.
Exactly how it changed.
Right. And again, it goes against the idea that we're going to get rid of the national debt too. But Congress, he convinced them. Congress, and it was really what was left of the Federalist Party that was opposed to him. The Republican Congress was so connected with Jefferson at this time. There was very little opposition to Jefferson in his administration because of the close ties that he had with both houses of Congress. Now we come to the embargo. We're skipping past the rest of his first term. We're now near the end of his second term. And again, we're dealing with the Napoleonic Wars. And now Great Britain, again, is attacking our ships. Basically, we're getting it from both sides. France has a decree, or Napoleon issues this decree that anybody who sides with England is against us. And England, basically the same. Anybody who's trying to trade with France is against us. So there's no neutrals from either side. A very difficult position to be in for Jefferson. What position do you take? What do you do when both sides demand that you oppose the opposite side and will attack your ships and will take any merchant ships that are trading with the opposite side? Well, the thing to do if you had no pride in yourself really would have been to side with Great Britain. They are the ones who had the navy that could enforce this far more than France did. But they expected a kind of humiliation that the United States was not prepared to accept. We're going to board your ships on the high seas. We're going to take your sailors that we believe have been deserted from our navy. And we're going to be not very nice about it. So if you want to trade with any other country, you're going to have to go through us. And so ultimately that was a price that really no one wanted to pay in the United States. Too great a humiliation. So it was either we can go to war or we're going to impose this embargo. we're not going to trade with anybody. We're going to keep our ships at home. And the only thing that we were allowing in this embargo was for ships to travel up and down our coast to trade amongst ourselves. I like this this cartoon that ultimately it became very unpopular, and so this is a turtle called "Oh Grab Me." Do you see what "Oh Grab Me" is? It's embargo spelled backwards. So this is this cursed "Oh Grab Me," and this guy's saying, "Damn, how he nicks him." So this is the embargo called "Oh Grab Me" against the merchants. So this was the one time that Jefferson thoroughly went against his own principles. He wanted to enforce this embargo. He started calling anyone who would go against it a traitor to his country. And he became very severe and pushed legislation that those who were caught smuggling, and this included even to Canada. Canada is right next to us, as we know. How do you stop the trade between the United States and Canada? It was almost impossible. He wanted to call out the militia. We're going to call out the National Guard. We're going to put a stop to these criminals, these traitors to the country. We're going to impose fines and imprisonment to those who were cheating, who were traitors. And this put Jefferson in a very poor light. For the first time in his career, really, he became quite vicious in pursuing those who would break the embargo. And as a result, he became rather unpopular near the end of his second term. He would say, as the months drew closer to the end of his presidency, he was like a prisoner about to be released, and decided to release himself early. After the election in November, he basically retired at that point. He would no longer give input, direction to his own administration. And he would say, basically, Madison has been elected. I refer you to him. He will soon be in office, and so I'm retired now. And it was a very difficult situation for the last 3 or 4 months of his administration, because the president would not give his input anymore. Expected Madison to start even before he was president. But he retired. He had a very, generally speaking, very happy retirement back at Monticello, and along with John Adams, they both died on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1826. And we have the Jefferson Monument. Any questions on Thomas Jefferson? Yes?
I went for a management course for 6 weeks at the University of Virginia, which he built. And I'm not sure when, during your lecture, he built the University of Virginia, but they never referred to him as Thomas Jefferson. It was always Mr. Jefferson.
Ah, Mr. Jefferson. Yeah, I suppose that would be common.
Did he do the University of Virginia while he was president, or after he was president, or before he was president?
I believe it might have been while he was president. I'm not sure, honestly.
You can see the campus from Monticello.
Right.
So he watched it being built.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, so Next week we have James Madison and James Monroe. See if we can knock off another couple presidents there.